Today we're going to be comparing two high-end ultra-compact travel strollers. The original King of the Hill, the Babyzen Yoyo, and the brand new Bugaboo Ant, arguably the most notable stroller brand ever to take a shot at the throne. Despite both aiming to fill the same niche of travel and especially airline comfort, these are very different strollers. Let's start with some stats. The Bugaboo Ant clocks in at 7.2 kilos versus 6.2 on the Yoyo, and it folds down to 55 by 38 by 23 centimeters versus the Yoyo's 52 by 44 by 18. In relation to weight capacity, the Ant claims 22 kilos in the seat and 8 kilos in the basket, while the Yoyo claims 18 kilos in the seat and 5 kilos in the basket. On the surface, if you followed with these numbers, a simple suggestion emerges, that the Babyzen is a tad lighter and smaller, and thus has slightly decreased weight capacities. But I would like to take a moment to argue against this assumption. My gut feeling on this is that Bugaboo tends to overreport their weight capacities in general, because they don't always realize what those numbers mean in the real world, when taking into account child size and the effects of terrain. While conversely, Babyzen might be underreporting their weight capacity, because being conservative in this respect is better for the performance and longevity of the stroller and thus their reputation. But let's look at it another way and focus on the seat. Babyzen says 18 kilos, which is a 4-year-old, according to standard child growth, and Bugaboo says 22 kilos, which is a 5-year-old. Now, in my opinion, neither of these strollers is really large enough for a 4 or a 5-year-old, not comfortably at least. In fact, personally, I don't really think you should be strapping down a 4 or 5-year-old in a stroller at all. So then obviously it comes down to size, not weight. And just looking at these two, isn't it obvious that the Yoyo can accommodate a larger child? Oh, I know most reviewers and retailers will bust out their measurement tape and measure the butt end and the seat back and conclude seat dimensions this way, without any acknowledgement of supportive seat walls, or more importantly, how high the canopy actually sits above the back of the seat. But you're smarter than that, right? Just look at them. The Yoyo fits a bigger kid. I would place the optimal age for comfortably fitting your kid into the Ant at preferably under 2, assuming a standard size kid, and add maybe 6 to 8 months for the Yoyo. They'll still fit after that, but I'm talking comfortably. Now, there is an advantage with the Ant seat though, which is, from a design perspective, arguably the cause for its smaller size, and that is that it's reversible. Most ultra-compact travel strollers have a forward-facing only seat, because this is the optimal means of capitalizing size and weight-wise from the natural shape of any stroller. Because the handle is naturally your highest point on the stroller, and other than that one weirdo, the Stook Explorer, the handles also generally determine the width of a stroller as well. Thus, by using the already existing rigidity of the handle arms as a point for suspending a looser forward-facing only seat, stroller designers have an easy formula for eliminating the weight and complexity of a separate seat unit, while maximizing the width and length of the seat itself. Not having a reversible seat is a serious trade-off for some people though. Hence the reason why, with larger strollers, 4-wheel reversible seat models are generally more popular than 3-wheeler models, despite the fact that 3-wheelers tend to outperform them in most other ways. In the long run, I think that the reversible seat and the market of parents who find this characteristic crucial will probably be the chief saving grace for the Ant, despite a number of flaws in comparison to other travel strollers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. One last note I'd like to make about the seats is the recline. So the Bugaboo Ant does have a full recline, while the Babyzen Yoyo has an almost full recline. Now, when you're thinking about the recline though, in relation to sleeping, first off, let me note that the Bugaboo Ant only has the full recline in the reversed seating position. But when you're talking about sleeping and you have your seats reclined, I would note that the Babyzen Yoyo has these walls for holding in your child's arms, and it has a footboard for supporting their feet. This means that while they're sleeping, their arms and their legs are not just going to be dangling into space. While unfortunately on the Bugaboo Ant, you don't have either of these. So there is a potential, especially if you're having a slightly larger kid sleep in this, that there's going to be some discomfort as a result of not having anything to actually support their feet or their arms while they're sleeping. Okay, let's move on to folding. I'm going to fold both of these down and show you how they work. I just want to say from the outset that the Bugaboo Ant does have a far more complex fold. The reason for this being that they have an intermediary stage between fully extended and fully folded down, being what I like to call fake suitcase mode, where you basically have the stroller all the way folded, but you have access to the long handle for pulling it around airports and such. So in order to fold down the Ant, you need to first push back the canopy, and then it has these two large sort of hinged wings on the sides of the back seat unit to fold in, and then you push down the back of the seat. And as I'm doing all of these steps, please note with the Bugaboo Ant that unlike the majority of strollers out there, you have to take the steps in order. Most strollers have like a most economic order for which you fold down or fold up a stroller, but with the Ant, there's actually safety catches within the mechanisms that will not allow you to access the next step of the process unless you first completed the step before. In addition to that, whenever you're dealing with anything with the seat, the textiles have a habit of sort of hanging out beyond the seat unit and getting in the way of your mechanism, so you got to make sure everything is really tucked in. So in any case, we've now done 2 steps so far with the seat. You then want to fold it all the way down and check that all of those textiles are tucked in. Then this allows you to move on to the next stage, which is lifting up these triggers on the side and pushing these until it clicks into place. And this is going to be a little hard unless those wheels kind of turn by themselves to the side so that that mechanism can fully close. And then, after all that, you're now in fake suitcase mode, and you can finish the fold by pressing in and pushing down this 3-tiered telescopic handle and the folding unit at the top. So that's the fold on the Bugaboo Ant. Let's move on to the Babyzen Yoyo. Babyzen Yoyo, by contrast, has a very simple fold. It's really just 2 steps, and you can take them in whatever order you find best. I like doing the handle first. Just drop the handle, reach underneath, and there is a catch. The whole thing just snaps together like this. And then rather than that long suitcase handle for wheeling your stroller around, you have a strap you can throw over your shoulder. Okay, let's move on to mechanics then, and we'll start with the handle. Looking at the Babyzen Yoyo, it has a contiguous handle. There are no moving parts on the handle itself, and the handle essentially stops right here at that folding mechanism because the portion lower is connected to the larger support of the overall chassis construction. Very simple handle. There's really no mechanisms within the handle itself that can go wrong. I actually have not seen any points at which these folding mechanisms have had trouble. Of course, they could have trouble at some point, but I have not seen that happen. So very simple. Move on to the Bugaboo Ant, and what we actually have is what I consider the most worrisome mechanical aspect of the entire stroller, which is the handle then, and it is a 3-part telescopic system with this sort of folding mechanism at the top, and this is not meant for handle adjustment. It is simply meant so that when that handle is pushed all the way down, it can fold in tighter. Now the problem when you have this sort of a setup is that you have a lot of points at which the handle itself can weaken. You see? So as you wobble the handle, and this is a new stroller, you'll notice that it already comes out of the box a bit weak at all of those points, the telescopic points and the handle at the top. In addition, all of this must slide down and disconnect or lock symmetrically as you're pushing it up and down. And over time, as terrain and use starts to weaken up all these points, not only will the handle get looser, but you will wind up dealing with symmetry issues with how it extends or how it folds down. One other thing that I would note with this handle is that, we'll get to it later, but this is not a very good terrain sort of a travel stroller. Of course, no travel strollers are really that good on terrain. This in particular, though, has 4.5-inch front wheels, so it has trouble over rougher terrain. And that looseness of the handle is going to make it so that you don't really feel that terrain so much, but it does not mean that the stroller actually has any sort of suspension. It's simply that all of those looser points in the handle are absorbing that kinetic energy from the terrain and loosening the handle more, but also making it feel as though it has some sort of shock absorption that it doesn't. And that's not going then to, of course, help your kid or help the stability of the stroller in the long run. In addition, I would note that even though it's an 84-centimeter long handle, the Babyzen Yoyo does beat it out at height by a few centimeters. Okay, I wanted to make a few notes on the central fold on the Bugaboo Ant. The central fold in this case would really just be those 2 white triggers there. It's not really a central fold, but I'll discuss that in a moment. The Babyzen Yoyo does have an actual central fold. It is the mechanism located under the seat, which is hard for me to show you here, but we have other videos which actually show that. Which when you depress that mechanism, the whole stroller folds itself together. So the mechanism itself is quite strong, the construction of the chassis is quite strong, but anytime you have something like this where you have the central fold and then all of these separate hinged elements over the course of the stroller, you do have a potential for some looseness occurring, especially after a few years, and if you've used it over a little bit rougher terrain with maybe a little bit extra weight in the stroller, you will wind up having some looseness at all of those joints. I have seen a few cases in which there has been actual breakage. It is possible to tighten some of these points, but it's not always that particularly easy. That being said, though, it is a good and easy system. It is an actual, again, central folding system on the Babyzen Yoyo. But the Babyzen Yoyo is constructed with a certain amount of sturdiness in mind, and if you're careful with your weights and with the sort of terrain you put this stroller to use on, then it will hold out just fine. The Bugaboo Ant, as I said, doesn't really have exactly a central folding mechanism. All the other Bugaboo strollers other than the B pretty much do, and they have the most complex central folding mechanisms on the market. But with the Ant, Bugaboo has actually gone in line with a more common design for folding down a stroller sort of across the whole market, which is to combine that telescopic handle idea with a very simple mechanism for releasing the rear frame so that it collapses up against the front frame. Now, the weak point in that sort of a setup is almost always the telescopic handle, the telescopic arms, which we've now covered. And the stronger point is that you get to make this mechanism a lot simpler. So it is really a very simple sort of lock and release type mechanism. When it does eventually weaken, you will have a little bit of movement, especially if you go over curbs and stuff where the rear frame might poke a little bit towards the front frame slightly, but in general, it's actually quite a strong setup for a stroller in general in order to decomplexify this central folding mechanism. Okay, let's have a little bit closer look at the rear frames of both of these two strollers. Neither one has any suspension to speak of, but travel strollers generally do not have much suspension on the rear frames. As far as the rear wheels go, I actually like the construction of the rear wheels on the Ant a bit better because they have that standard Bugaboo ridge and they do feel a little bit larger. They are actually removable, which is actually also nice given several years of experience with the Babyzen Yoyo. Babyzen Yoyo, again, is a very strongly constructed stroller. One area that does tend to sometimes have trouble is the ball bearings inside the rear wheels, and that can be a real pain to shift out if you do have that sort of a problem, because they rust, and then they rust tight to the axle, and then you actually have to use power tools to get them off. Now, of course, you can do things in order to prevent rust. You can lubricate properly and be careful with your stroller. But in general, I would say that the Bugaboo Ant has slightly better back wheels. Both of these brake systems are quite simple. They're both activated via a lever. They do work in different ways. The Bugaboo Ant has a pin that pushes out into the teeth on the inside facing of the rear wheels, whereas the Babyzen Yoyo has a pin that is always present and simply changes in orientation so that it locks inside of those teeth. The teeth and the whole plastic on the inside of the rear wheel facing of the Babyzen is a little bit larger, a little bit sturdier than it is on the Ant. Ant, of course, hasn't come out yet, so we don't know whether this is going to be a problem, but I would say that the plastic ridges could indicate from past experience that there might be some trouble with breakage on the rear wheels from the brake system in general. Okay, let's have a look then at the front end, and the first thing I want to talk about doesn't actually have to do with the driving characteristics, which is what's going to dominate the performance of the front end, but it has to do with that footrest. If you'll notice, the footrest on the Babyzen sits a bit higher up, and with the larger seat, it kind of makes it in the kind of middle range, I suppose, for a child's leg length while you're using the stroller. I tend to feel that the Bugaboo Ant's front end is a bit lower. It's also not as obviously set up as a footrest. It will obviously act as one, as the child has to put their foot somewhere. But the seat is a bit smaller, and so when you're talking about kids in, say, that 1.5 range, their legs and their feet might actually not fully reach down to that as a footrest. Okay, that's a smaller point. Okay, let's move on then and talk about the wheels and how the wheels are connected to the stroller. On the Babyzen Yoyo, the front wheels as well as the back wheels, as I already said, are not actually removable. However, it's quite nice in the sense that the way they are connected in has like pressure washers, and it's set up so that I've really never ever actually seen any sort of wobble problems occurring on this stroller. It's a very tight connection point here. On the Bugaboo Ant, the wheels are removable, but Bugaboo in general is also very, very good at kind of preventing any sort of wobble problems through the actual engineering of the stroller. We did a review on the Ant, and I actually go into how that is achieved on the Bugaboo Ant if you're curious. Both of the front forks have a certain amount of suspension. That's quite common when you have frontal swivel wheels. And then there is the key issue of difference between these two strollers actually, and that is the size of the wheels. And a lot of people might not realize this, but the size of your front wheels is going to determine a lot about the sort of terrain you can drive on. I would say almost more than suspension in some cases, because if you have very small front wheels, you're going to get hung up a lot more on very rugged terrain before suspension even becomes an issue. 4.5 front wheels is just, in my opinion, too small. The GB Pocket has 4.5-inch front wheels, and I think that just by adding that extra inch or two, you do a lot for the drivability of a stroller. Now, of course, we're talking about ultra-compact travel strollers, so neither of these is going to perform very well on terrain. They are mainly meant for airports and smoother city streets and stuff. But having just that slight edge will make a difference when you leave the airport. So which one of these two is going to be better for you? I would say that unless not having a reversible seat is a deal breaker for you, the choice firmly lies with the Babyzen Yoyo for a multitude of reasons. Not only is it sturdier and better to drive, but it's also easier to fold, and in my opinion, easier to carry. Characteristics that are arguably more important for an ultra-compact travel stroller, since travel itself is so full of time pressures, lines and security checks, and people constantly waiting behind you. The Babyzen just works for these situations, while in my mind the complexity of the Ant make it unrealistic for them. It's also significantly cheaper as well, of course. You know, it's funny, the Babyzen Yoyo was originally developed back in 2012 as the first stroller to fold down small enough to count as cabin luggage. That was it. That's the innovation. And 7 years later, it's still king of the hill. They improved a few things with the shift to the Yoyo Plus, but not much. There wasn't much needed to improve. Since then, a variety of stroller brands have tried to make something better, and in my opinion, they've all failed. For me, the reason for this is that not one of those competing models has really tried to best the Yoyo on its own turf. They've all tried to add something. The GB Pocket said, let's make it even smaller and lighter. It doesn't need to be any smaller or lighter than what is necessary for cabin luggage. The Easy S said, let's make it even easier to fold. It's already easy enough to fold. And now Bugaboo wants to turn it into a suitcase. Nobody gets it. The metric is simply, what is the sturdiest, most terrain-capable stroller with the largest possible seat that can be easily folded down to fit as cabin luggage? That's it. Not smaller, not a suitcase. Just simple and sturdy. Period. In any case, we hope you found this video interesting. And if you did, we ask that you subscribe, as it helps us to continue making videos in the future.